My name is Lisa Roger, and as a member of the Committee of Church and Ministry, I call this meeting to order, this Ecclesiastical Council. I'm going to let you all know immediately that we do have a quorum today, so we'll be able to proceed. As far as I can tell, we have 10 churches represented, so that's a blessing. Thank you all for being here. As you well might imagine, Beatitudes is very well represented here today. So we're going to start off with an opening prayer by the Reverend Don Logbottom.
Welcome to Church of the Beatitudes. This is a real celebratory moment. When we bring forth a person headed towards ordination, it's the fruition of the efforts of many people. It does indeed take a village. And so welcome here today. Let's pray. Oh God, you are like a mother and father to us. You nurture us, you nurse us, you gather us when we've fallen, you challenge us when we go astray, but you are always with us, never more than a heartbeat away. As we gather this day, we pray for your guidance. We thank you for Andria, and I thank you for those you have placed in her path along the way. Be with us now as we seek to do the work of discernment. These things we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Good afternoon. My name is Dana Bender, and I've been doing a lot of reflection all morning. Kind of surreal that 10 years ago, Andria Davis, at the ripe old age of 16 years old, was standing in this very sanctuary and became baptized by our interim pastor, Tom Stiers. She was surrounded by this loving community, and she was also surrounded by half of her social studies class, who agreed to come from Arizona School for the Arts and hang with her that morning and support her. At the end of the time, during the coffee hour, they were all wandering around talking to members of the congregation, having coffee, and I walked up to them because I was a teacher there, as I am now, and I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Well, we just took a pledge to raise her in the faith, and we're just wondering what the faith is, so we're finding out from people around us." And it was really pretty cool. As I mentioned, Andria went to Arizona School for the Arts, where I met her and invited her to sing a requiem, and she came and sang and never left, and we're very glad that she didn't. After Arizona School for the Arts in 2006, graduating, she went to Smith College. No, I'm wrong. That's right. I'm right. 2006, she went to Smith College, where she got her undergraduate degree in Jewish Studies and Religion. And that was in 2010. She immediately went to Chicago Theological Seminary and just finished up there this past spring. And currently she's part-time here doing some youth work and finding her way. Andria, if you don't know her, haven't ever met her, I highly recommend it. She's a wonderful, wonderful person. I think you will see that today. And it's with a great deal of enthusiasm and love that I introduce Andria Davis.
Hi, everyone. This is a little bit overwhelming to see you all here, but it's also delightful. I didn't realize how wonderful it would feel to come into this space and see so many people who I don't get to see all the time. So it's kind of like having a big family reunion today. So thank you for coming out. I want to take this time just to extend some thanks to the people who've journeyed with me, and that's all of you, but some special thanks to Lisa Roger and to Dana Bender, who've been mentors to me on this journey. I want to also thank the conference staff and Church of the Beatitudes staff, and the members of the Beatitudes Community Life Ministry who have worked so hard to make this day what it is, and again, accompanied me on this long journey. To all of the clergy and the laity who are gathered here today, thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday and out of your busy Advent season to teach me what it is to be in Christian community. I want to thank also my family who've given me the permission and the skills to walk on this journey. And I'll start with my family. I was raised in a happily and healthily unchurched and interfaith household. The phase of my family of origin have been important, very important foundations out of which my own faith has grown. My father, who identifies as a pagan, instilled in me a deep appreciation for the earth and for the community. Together with his coven, we tended to our surroundings and each other, recognizing that stewardship is one of the most important gifts we can give to one another. From my mother, who is a devout atheist, I learned the important skills of critical reflection and healthy skepticism. It was from her that I learned to think and to question those everyday assumptions and judgments that guide my life and my interactions. This knowledge has taught me to be aware of and to speak out against the personal and systemic injustices that so often go unnoticed and unnamed. Given my background, as Dana alluded to, given my background, it was somewhat surprising that I found my way into the church. My realization that the church could be a place for me, I think was serendipitous, or maybe God's presence moving in my life. As a student at Arizona School for the Arts, I was, on a very superficial level, able to be a participant in the community of First Congregational Church in downtown Phoenix. And though I was never a worshiping member of that community, I was able to see and experience a congregation that practiced a message of hospitality and inclusivity. I was able to observe Christian people who are authentically living out their lives as people of faith. And I believe it was that background and that context that made it even a possibility for me to step into the church in my own way. When I was invited by Dana Bender to sing the annual All Saints Requiem here at Church of the Beatitudes, I knew that it would be an okay and a safe place for me to be. And joining the choir was certainly a turning point in my faith. The choir members and the wider church welcomed me into the community before I even had an understanding of the profound impact that a faith community could have on my life. Though I knew none of the rituals, the customs, the biblical stories, the prayers, or the songs, the church walked with me and let me question and learn, and supported me as I grew. During this time, I began to understand the meaning of Christ's love and felt a call from God to spend my life creating communities such as this, where people of all walks of life could feel the love of God from the people around them. College and seminary were a time of discernment for me. They marked the beginning of my theological journey through intense critical reflection. They were, for me, a time to learn about the assumptions of my faith and to learn some of the things that I didn't learn growing up, those biblical stories, the songs, that important stuff. I learned also to push back on the dangerous theological concepts that somehow had become embedded in my theological understandings just by living in the world that we're living in. I also delved into the study of the holy texts of the three major monotheistic religions. From them, I learned ethics, spiritual practices, and methods of study that continue to guide my ministry today. But it was also during this time that I began to see my call was more than just to building comfortable Christian communities. I recognized what a privilege it had been for me to have experienced faith communities that had welcomed me, and only experienced faith communities that had welcomed me. Because I was realizing that there were many people in my communities who had not been welcomed by their faith communities for various reasons. And so I struggled to reconcile the ministry of Jesus that I knew, which is one of radical hospitality and love, with the ministries of those who would exclude people on biblical or moral grounds. Furthermore, it became impossible for me to not see the image of Jesus' crucifixion in the personal and systemic violences that permeate our world. Through Jesus' death, we acknowledge the moral imperative to change our ways, and that is to build the beloved community in our midst. Often, like the Roman Empire, we continue to crucify in our own ways. Or worse, we stand by and allow injustices to happen. I recognize in myself a call and a gift to find balance in what I understand to be the gospel message, and that is working towards the kingdom of God or building the beloved community. On one hand, this is pastoral work. It's the work of building a place where people can be safe, of accompanying people wherever they are on life's journey, as we say, and of showing people that they have a spiritual place or a place at the spiritual table, but also at the tables of leadership, of agency, and of accountability. On the other hand, I'm also called to offer a prophetic message and demonstrate prophetic leadership. I'm called to help us move outside our walls and our comfort zones and to acknowledge our places of privilege. It is in finding the balance between the pastoral and the prophetic that we can work together to build the beloved community. I recognize the ministry of all believers, regardless of faith tradition, of background, of foundational identities and experiences. We are all endowed with the gifts and skills that allow us to contribute to justice, to building the beloved community. But when I say that I am called by God to ministry, I understand my relationship to God in a special way. I intentionally recognize God's creative presence in me and strive to act in a way that is accountable to that presence. I understand myself to be called to ordain ministry in a parish setting. I believe that bringing people together in worship, in sharing of the sacraments, in preaching the gospel message in word and in action, and accompanying those invested in the mission of the church is a vital part of building the beloved community. I believe firmly that when we come together in worship, to share the sacraments, to share a meal, to perform acts of service, we are practicing how to build the beloved community. This time together allows us also to re-energize so that we might be better equipped to go out into the world to work for justice and mercy. I have great trust that our faith will change the world. And that our faith communities are a vital part of doing that work. And I'll quote Margaret Mead, and she says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens," and I'd say people for various reasons, that a small group of thoughtful people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. It is for this reason, in part, that I love the United Church of Christ. I appreciate our denomination because it gives individual congregations and communities the authority and the autonomy to cover their own needs. It allows each of our churches and our communities to discern how they might be suited to function for the good and for God. At the same time, we are, as they say, united and uniting. We are all one. The manifestations of our denomination at association, conference, and national levels connect us to one another, to the larger body of Christ. We are bound together in our shared and divergent histories, in our common and our unique goals, and we hold ourselves accountable to one another to continue to work for good. I recognize that we are at a turning point in our faith. With decreased attendance, with struggling for funds, with increased number of people choosing to identify with no religion or faith community, it's important that we embrace the change that is true of our creative God, and that we leave room for the Holy Spirit to make change in our midst. We must stay focused on building the beloved community, but I know that that's not going to be easy. And I know that it's not a time for us to be complacent about that change. Instead, it's a time for us to risk and be open to that creative presence of God. As one who's called to minister in a parish setting, it is my hope to contribute to the life of the church as a teacher, as a guide, as a support, as an advocate, and as a fellow journeyer. Together, I think we can create a safe space that will allow us to take the daring risks that are necessary to move the church forward and also to bring us closer to the beloved community. Thank you.
All right. now we get to dialogue with Andria, and this is an important part of an ecclesiastical council. We started this dialogue, many of us, with Andria years ago, but this is an important part of it, and we all will continue on this journey with her, and part of that journey is today. So I hope you have brought some good questions for Andria. I would say hard questions, but I don't want to make her nervous, more nervous. So I have a little mic here, and if you'll just raise your hand, and I'll bring the mic to you, and Andria will field questions from you all.
Andria, what I'd like to ask you to do is define what you mean by call, and then answer the question, how are you called? What is your sense of that?
So I understand, as I said in my paper, I believe in the ministry of all believers. I believe that very firmly, that we are all in some way endowed with the gifts to make change in the world and to push us towards justice and to pull other people along with us. When I think about call, my first inclination is to be nervous about it, because call implies some sort of privilege. But I use that language because I think that there's some important power in privilege, right? There's some important power in having a relationship, a special relationship with God, that I recognize in myself. I recognize that God's creative presence is working in me to create change in the world. And that's how I would understand call. So I know that I have discerned a special relationship with God that says, Andrea, you need to go out into the world and make this change. And then that means to me being called to a parish setting where I see for various reasons my presence being an important catalyst for change, and an important catalyst for justice to be present, an important example for what it means to be in community, what it means to be inclusive. Is that?
Could when you ask a question, could you stand, introduce yourself, and give your church?
Nancy Elsenheimer.
Sorry.
Catizo, United Church of Christ. I appreciate your speaking about call, and maybe as a follow-up to that, appreciate your heeding the call in what many consider to be a dying profession. What kind of support resources do you need to be about reinventing church?
So the first thing I want to say is that I think that where we are right now, if we don't start thinking creatively, I think you're right, that what we see right now is not going to last generations in the future. So, but I wouldn't say it's dying, because I think that there's still that creative piece in us, and I say creativity a lot, and that's absolutely how I understand God. That creative piece in us is allowing for us to see church in a new way. So you asked me specifically about support. What I'm looking for in support is my colleagues who are doing church in a way that is open to change and open to seeing new things. With that said, I think there's something to be learned from tradition. So it's living into the tension between the traditions that we have learned over the last 2,000 years and beyond, but also knowing that, as we say in the United Church of Christ, God is still speaking. Right? So let's listen to that. So support-wise, it's definitely about finding partners in all of you, and beyond all of you, who would work with me, right, in that endeavor.
Lori Ramsey, Church of the Beatitudes. Andy, what area of ministry do you feel most drawn to work in?
Certainly in the parish. And this has been a journey for me. I think in the past, If you'd asked me this question a year ago or a year and a half ago, I would have told you that I love being in church. Church is a place, I love it, but I'm really called to the academy. I love theology. I love doing academic work. But I took a unit of clinical pastoral education, and that made me reevaluate my whole call to ministry. And I say that lightly, but it actually really opened up some of the blocks that I had on this, and I, so the parish is where I want to be. I recognize how important being in a community like this is to my understanding, my relationship to God. Specifically within the parish, I think that's still open for discernment. Right now I'm doing youth ministry, and I'm learning amazing things from my youth that I get to work with. They teach me things every day. And I'm seeing God in a new way because of the work that I'm doing with my young people. But I also find some passion. I have passion beyond that as well. And I think, as Nancy said, or Nancy sort of lifted up, we're in a changing time in our church. So I don't know if we're necessarily going to see pastors who are only doing this, only doing one thing. And in fact, knowing myself, I know that my ministry extends beyond the walls of the church. So it's going to definitely be a both and in my life.
I'm going to be nasty and quote from your paper.
Cool. I got mine over here.
I'm James Clark. I'm a retired pastor and a member of the Church of the Palms in Sun City. And I want you to know I made a great sacrifice coming across Bell Road.
Yeah.
I've got it on page 10, although you didn't mark the pages, so I marked them.
Yeah.
Okay. And the statement is, while I believe that all communities, including strictly secular communities, can be doing work that strives for the beloved community, and I like that term that you use, I believe the church is distinct vessel for that work. And I'm going to bounce on that one word, distinct. When I thought all during your paper, you were probably not being distinct, but you were being part of a vast number of people who developing beloved community. I put the word one, okay, rather than distinct.
That would be a better word, and I.
Oh well, thank you very much.
Yes.
That makes,
yeah,
that makes my 35 years worthwhile.
Thank you. That's the word I would rather use than distinct. I think what I meant was, the church is a specific. It is one manifestation of a community that's doing this work. So thank you for highlighting that.
Well, thank you for your sharing.
I'm Joe Friedenberg from Desert Palm. I'm a layperson. I want to say to you, I think your paper was wonderful. As a layperson to read it, it was just wonderful. And it did my heart good to read it. I wanted to just really affirm particularly your insight into what I'll call ministry of the laity. And I think that insight from your perspective, you will not have trouble being in a church and being a pastor. And I would just like to say that to you as an affirmation.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I'm Judy Myers from Church of the Beatitudes. I'm having trouble phrasing this, but I'm going to try. Seems like people come to church with various subtitles, be it skeptic, Republican, Democrat, retired minister, gay, lesbian, whatever. Do you foresee a time when we can come to church as just part of a community and work as the community and not have these subtitles? And another question is there a question that you don't want anybody to ask? And if is that question, what's the question and what's the answer to the question that you don't want people to ask?
Sweet. To your first question, no, I hope there's never a time that we come to the church community where we don't bring along the baggage that we all carry with us. I think that coming into a church community carrying that baggage is why we come into church. I think that we all bring, or it is part of my hope to be part of a space, help to create a space in which nobody is afraid of bringing their various subtitles, their identities with them. Yeah. With that said, I hope that we can live into communities that we build, right? I think building communities across difference is very important, but building factions can be problematic, right? Yes, and I could caveat that a little bit more, but I really want everybody to be able to be who they are when they step in the doors or engage in ministry in their own way. The question that I don't want anyone to ask, wow, okay, I could do this honestly, or I could do it. So when I was doing preparation for this, I was reading all the various questions, and I was talking to my friends who've been through their ecclesiastical councils, and that is always the question: what's the hardest question anyone asked you? And some people said polity stuff, and that's just fun for me, but that's because I'm a nerd. But the one that has been a point of discernment for me has been about, and I planted this question actually with my dear friend Eddie here. It was about my spiritual practices and my prayer life. Being throughout my various internships that I've done, CPE, my field placement, and here in my position at Church of the Beatitudes, I've had an opportunity to lead pastoral prayers, and has always been the hardest thing for me to do. I have the hardest time praying with people. And I think in some way it's because I feel very incompetent in speaking to God, right? Or speaking about God. I'm nervous, that's why and I think that has a lot to do, I mentioned in my presentation that during college and seminary, and even now, I'm still pushing back on those dangerous theological concepts that get embedded in our souls, in the way we talk to God, and the way we talk about God. And there are things that I say to God that I don't mean at all, right? And that's because that's the way the world has taught me to talk about God. And so when I'm praying with people and for people in front of the church, I'm afraid I'm going to slip into something and say something that I don't believe about God and that is a bad model. So I think that's been the hardest part of ministry. So I guess that my question would be, where's your growing edge? And that's my growing edge. And I think what I'm learning is, one, that it's okay to mess up, and that we're all learning, and we're all discerning our relationships to God. We're learning how to talk to God. But it's also about intentionality, right? I don't want to say something that's dangerous to my community and teach and model in a bad way. So it's a lot of pressure. So that's sort of where I'm grappling. Yes.
Right here. I'm Teresa Sterling, pastor at the Congregational Church of the Valley. And this question leads right into what you were talking about. How are you grappling with grace and the responding to grace with the kids, with your youth? How do you talk about grace and mercy and grapple with them that it's freely given and not always fair?
Yeah, that's really hard. I mean, I think one of the things I try to affirm with my youth, and I'm hoping I'm doing a good job, so they'll tell me afterwards if I'm not, is that God is loving always, 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 always. Just is. Just is. It just is. So, and how do we model God's loving presence with one another, right? So it's about treating people kindly and fairly when we're together, and that's how we model that behavior. Yeah.
Oh, right here.
I'll follow you. I can't see people very well, so that's why I'm getting close. Hey, Judy.
Judy Green Davis, Church of the Palms in Sun City. Andrea, it is a beautiful paper that you've written. It borders on poetic. Your next step, if of course we vote yes today, your next step is to seek a call. Can you tell us where you will be looking and what you will be looking for?
So I want to stop and say that my first step is to be here with the community of Beatitudes. I have a commitment and a covenant with Beatitudes right now, and so I want to stay with my head in the game here with this community. So just wanted to say that because I think it's important to not be thinking too far in advance. If I was to identify my dream call, it would be a community, a small community, who knows that they want to do big things, who knows that they can go out into their community or make change in their own community. People who are passionate. I want to be with people who are passionate, but who might need some guidance or support or love in that endeavor. I also love working with communities that are more transient, for whatever that may mean. Specifically, I'm thinking about college-aged communities of people. I think that when we are in a community and stay in a community for 50 years or 60 years or 70 years, sometimes we forget about creativity. We forget about movement, and we think about the past a lot, but don't step outside of that which makes us comfortable, right? So I'd love a community that's really intentional about that, but also a community by its nature that lives into that forward movement. So a transient community.
Hi, I'm Don Longbottom from here at Beatitudes. Andrea, this is for you now that you're warmed up.
Okay.
I want to quote you. While I understand that I'm called to ordain ministry, I do not believe my call to have a superior status over those who work for the beloved community in some other manner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Someday down the road, not here, but somewhere, you'll meet a hard-headed congregation. Okay?
What?
And you might be called upon to say, "Thus saith the Lord," and tell them something they don't want to hear. If you're just one of them in that sense, on what basis are you going to do that?
I'm resistant. Because I'm just by my nature resistant to hierarchies, I'm resistant to that. I'm going to tell you what to do, because telling you what to do doesn't necessarily garner change. And so I think it's about balancing sort of the pastoral role with the prophetic role in a congregation, and that we all have those dual realities in our lives. But as somebody who may be guiding the church in whatever way, as a senior pastor or as a pastor, it's about balancing the pastoral role that says, I can get down here with you. We're on a level with one another, right? But at the same time, I have a voice that says, this is the direction we really need to be thinking. So it's about building relationships with people that allow for some mutual knowing of one another, but also building a relationship with someone so that I can say to you and get real with you or get real with whoever that this is where we need to go. So it's definitely about balancing the mutual role with also the prophetic role.
I'm not quite done.
Go for it.
That was well done and slippery. I grant the balance, but the prophetic may push you at some point, will push you at some point to say, here's what the Lord has laid on me, thus saith the Lord. Where does that come from in you and your understanding of ordination and calling? And I grant that you've done the CPE and you've heard them and they've heard you, but at some point, read Amos, read Habakkuk.
Right.
How do you go there?
Right. It's about recognizing that God is speaking to me in a special way, that I know that I am firmly grounded in God, that I can make this statement boldly, even though it's risky, and even though it's painful, and even though it's hard. I know that it's the right thing to do. And it's about constantly discerning when it's God and when it's my ego, right? Or when it's me wanting to make something easy or something better, right? It's about discernment, but ultimately it's about knowing that I am in special relationship, or I acknowledge my special relationship with God that grounds me and guides me in that.
My name is Kimberly Bravo. I'm from Church of the Beatitudes. And my question to Andrea is, do you have a plan in place for when you may not feel that special connection with God at some point? When you're going to slip? When your spiritual needs become lacking because you're making sure everyone else's spiritual needs are being met? Do you have a plan in place for when that probably is going to happen? And if so, what is it?
Again, for me, it's about discernment. It's about really trying to stay intentional about my relationship to God, and my relationship by way of other people. And this is a very practical thing, and I probably do it every day. But I have colleagues that I, Facebook message or whatever and say, I did this, and it felt right, and it felt okay, but here's the consequences of this. And did I go wrong? Right? So it's about building important networks of support around me that help me in that discerning process. And also help me to remember when I need to be doing some self-care, right? When they stop and they say, you're just beating yourself up. You need to go breathe and take a walk. So that's been my process. The other piece of it is that I'm not necessarily afraid to apologize also. When I know that, like I said to Dr. Don, that when my ego gets in the way and I've fallen out of connection and I do something because I did it and I wasn't thinking, I'm not afraid of saying, I messed up. Let's try to rebuild the relationship.
Hi, Andrea. I'm Ken Heinzelman from Shadow Rock. And I have a feeling that you speak not just out of ideas or concepts that you hold, but that there are truths that have a hold of you that you can't let go of. And that will compel you to speak prophetically. In that line, quoting from your paper, it says here that the idea that we are on the cusp of the next great religious reformation, and this is a question that I struggle with as well, and that is, what is there one thing about the biblical narrative that we can take with us into the next Reformation? And is there one thing about the biblical narrative we ought to leave behind?
So I think it's very concrete, but the things that we need to leave behind about the biblical narrative are the things that we can use in the biblical narrative to exclude. And so that's a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of stuff in there that can be and have been used in disastrous and painful and violent and terrible ways. And there are times when we need to say, that's, written there. I'm having a hard time deciding that it's not written there, and let it go, right? But well, not but, that's the way it is for me. And I think in doing that, we will open up our understanding of the table that is open to all. And in that way, which is sort of it's all, the Bible is all about hospitality and inclusivity. And in letting go of the non-hospitable aspects of the biblical narrative, we can open up our understanding of how to be hospitable.
Hi, I'm Patty Arand from Shepherd of the Hills. You added a question to my list. After that, I'm wondering, what's the difference between being exclusive and being distinct in talking about various communities? And that's completely separate from what's your preferred metaphor for ministry? And why ordination as opposed to ministry in any other context?
The difference between exclusive and distinct, I think exclusive is, it's closed, whereas distinct has, hopefully, has some authentic understanding of itself, right? Something that is distinct has distinct parts. You can't define a thing by a thing, but it's about knowing authentically what one's identity or what something's identity is, whereas exclusive is sort of closed off. So when we talked about distinct down here, what I really mean is knowing that these are characteristics of a church community, and this is what makes it a church, right? A chair is a chair because it has specific and distinct parts. And it can come in a whole bunch of different manifestations, but when it has those parts, it's, it is what it is. That's not a very helpful answer. Maybe I'll keep thinking while I'm talking, and then I'll see if I can come back to it. What is my preferred metaphor? So I was thinking about this, and I was hoping it would come up. My preferred metaphor for ministry is the story of the walk of the two men journeying on the road to Emmaus. So we've got these two guys who are walking right after Jesus' death and disappearance, right? They don't know where he'd gone, but they heard the story about Jesus' the angels and the women were talking about this. Jesus is gone. They're grieving, right? They're walking on the road to Emmaus. They're grieving. They don't know what's happened, and a stranger comes up alongside them and walks with them and doesn't seem to know what's happened, this sort of world-rending experience. Doesn't seem to know what's going on. And they explain it. And the stranger chastises them a little bit, but then teaches them. Chastises them, saying, "Don't you know? These are the teachings you know," and then teaches them again. And so the stranger is accompanying them in their grief and also teaching them how to be in light of this experience that they've had. So as they get near Emmaus, they stop for the night, and the stranger makes to continue walking on. And the two men stop and they say, "Hang on, join us for a meal. This is what we do." And in the breaking of the bread, in that show of hospitality that is foundational to their understanding of faith and their understanding really to Jesus' teaching, Jesus is made known to them. So in that, there's a whole bunch of things that I could pull out of that for my own model of ministry, but part of it is accompanying people where they are on life's journey. And part of it is also providing a model in which the divine presence is made known to us in hospitality. So, and then ultimately, these men go out into the world and spread that message. So that's equipping them with some skills to go out and make change in the ways that they are able.
And why ordination?
Why ordination? Specifically, so in that I have a high sacramental theology. I understand the sacraments to be very important. And I'll be very specific in a story. I've had many, many friends, and I'm sure many of you in this space have had many friends, colleagues, acquaintances who've been denied a presence in the church for various reasons. They've been denied space at the table. They're not welcome to take communion. They're not welcome to get married. Their children have not been able to be baptized because their family structure doesn't allow for that, right, in the church. And I know that it's my place to open up the church in some way. I can be a face who can do these things for people. And that's part of my call to ministry. And that's a very specific privilege. Providing over sacraments is a very specific privilege afforded to one who is ordained. So that's one of the reasons.
Guess what?
Oh, I'm sorry, Dozer, I'm sorry. See, I stepped over myself.
Everybody wants to ask a question.
Yes.
Well, Andrea, first let me say I'm Dosha Carls from Church of the Beatitudes. And it's been a joy for me to see your unfolding faith, your growing, your journeying, to be a part of your life, to have this privilege to come to this moment. And I'm thinking of the ways that you are so open and honest, which I appreciate. We are needing this kind of presence more and more. I do think it's interesting from your paper, when you're citing what your mother had, in a sense, taught you, because in your younger years, apparently, I also learned to distrust and fear aspects of organized religion. You still have some fears about organized religion? Yeah. Let's hear what you think about the mistrust of organized religion. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there are some ways in which we get too focused on our institutional structures and maintaining the longevity of our institutional structures that we forget to be open to the creative presence of God that allows us to change. I think in some ways that's dictated by our fear of losing comfort, comfort in what we know. But at the same time, I think that there's value in institutions and structures because that is a place for us to come together with some comfort so that we can then boldly move out. So it's definitely a balance. But what I think I carry with me mostly is a desire not to get caught up in assuming that an institution can't change. And that my critical nature allows me to look at an institution and say, this isn't quite working right because there's some injustice going on, right? So we'll think very much about an institution, a church, an old church that doesn't have that has steps leading up to the sanctuary, for example. And the church says, well, this is the way it's always been. This is just how our church has been built. What are we going to do about it? That's fine. Well, that's exclusive, right? People who can't get up steps can't get into the church. So it's about looking at the church and not thinking, or looking at an institution and not thinking, it is what it is. But instead, let's take what we love about our institution and make it bigger, broader.
Thanks. Joyce?
Thanks, John.
Joyce Vincent, Church of the Beatitudes, and I'm really pleased that you found your way here.
Thank you.
My question you've partially answered with your last two comments. We are all members of a very liberal, progressive, and inclusive congregation. Our faith journey is, in some ways, on the same path. How will you deal with people from other congregations, other faith organizations that say that you are condemned to hell because you do not believe like they do and because you are misinterpreting the Bible?
Well, first of all, I would say that one of the joys about the United Church of Christ and about Beatitudes, and I'm sure about all of our congregations, is that the people who make it up come from incredibly diverse backgrounds. And that while, for the most part, we have some pretty progressive, liberal theological understandings, not everybody in our church and our community feels that way. So I think it's important to understand context and where people are coming from, and that we're all journeying. And we all have reasons that we believe and feel certain ways, and that it's important to meet people where they are in that level. And that's one of the things I strive to do. And sometimes that's very hard. It's very hard. But what I try to do when I encounter people who will push back against me for whatever reason is to just be as authentic as I can with them. Because when you meet someone face to face and you really get a chance to know them, sometimes your world changes. And it goes both ways. And I've found that in many, many people I've come across. I grow because of it. And it's also been wonderful because it helps me to check what assumptions I make about what people believe. And so in that way, I'm continuing to grow. And it's been important.
Charles Emerson, I attend the Church of the Beatitudes. In John 14, Jesus is attributed to have said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Do you believe that Jesus is the only way to God?
Jesus is partly my way, mostly my way, but Jesus is not the only way to God. And I think that people can know God in many, 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 many different ways. My upbringing has taught me that. My study has taught me that. But I know for me, the way I understand God is in part through how I understand Jesus, who is the Christ.
And other people can come to God in various ways.
Yep.
My name is Bill Nelson, and I'm a member of this church here, I think. This is a question of pure biblical scholarship that I want you to reflect on, so I can find out what Chicago is doing these days. Given the fact that the bulk of the deliberately prophetic materials in the Bible are written in poetry, do you attach any significance to that fact? How do you get stuck with this?
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what I was talking about over here, about how it's really hard to talk to God. And sometimes when we move into more creative ways of talking to God, it becomes easier. And I think that we see that today in the prophetic messages that come to us through song or through art. We open ourselves to God in a different way. And that can provide a medium for a prophetic message that is oftentimes pretty hard to say.
That was a very clever bit of avoidance.
No follow-up?
No follow-up.
Okay.
Oh, no. We'll get to you.
Michael Curry, Shadow Rock, UCC. Knowing the importance of confidentiality between pastor and parishioner, in your mind, when is it okay, in what situations is it appropriate for pastors to break confidentiality, and when is it not appropriate for pastors to break confidentiality?
When someone's life is in danger, their own or someone else's, is a method that I go by. I think it's important that we provide confidentiality otherwise. At the same time, I think that there's an important, it's an opportunity for discernment when a pastor decides it's important to refer somebody who needs to be referred to someone else. So again, it's about checking my ego and knowing when I can no longer handle a situation.
because it's not in somebody else's best interest or my own best interest. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Len Sylvester from Church of the Palms in Sun City. Andrea, this has been I think this is probably the best ecclesiastical council that I've experienced in the Southwest Conference. This is, yeah. And because of the questions as well as the answers, that we have experienced you as a pastor here, I believe. That's just a quick comment. I'm disappointed, however, because you posted a picture on Facebook in which you were wearing a terrific hat.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And as far as I'm concerned, you could wear that hat into the pulpit every single time you went in one. No, I'm not going to tell you.
We can guess, I think. I'm wearing some exceptional leggings, though. So. Space kitties. Space kitties.
There is a question here. Given what you know about yourself, which you have so eloquently shared, verbally and in writing, what do you think will be your first significant challenge in pastoral ministry?
I think I've probably had a bunch of them already.
Talking to other clergy.
Right. So I'll tell a story, and I hope my youth will forgive me that I tell this story, but it's mostly about me. So on Sunday, I was helping Don preside over worship, and we were doing communion. It was the first Sunday of the month. We were doing communion, and my youth, who I absolutely love and adore, some of them were sitting down in the front row, and they were a little bit excited. They had a lot of energy, and that energy was manifesting itself in some giggly ways. And I saw this happening. I'm standing at the table, and it's communion, and communion has a tendency occasionally to become quite somber. And so my youth are clearly a little bit giggly. And it was noticed by the congregation, and multiple people brought it to my attention and said, "Why, these youth, they're giggling during communion." And so afterwards, after the church, I went up to them and I said, "You guys, I appreciate your energy, but we need to talk about energy in a way that's respectful, like stop giggling during communion." And that is something that I apologize for, because I believe firmly that communion is fun. Communion is hopeful. Communion is happy. And I believe that energy in worship is important and is a manifestation of the Spirit in some way. It was a joy for me to see my youth in church having fun with one another, as opposed to waiting for the end of the hour so they could peace out, so they could leave. And so, one of my biggest struggles, and I've been thinking about this all week, and I went and talked to my colleagues from elsewhere and said, I did this thing, and I don't know what I did. It wasn't me. It wasn't true to my theology. It wasn't true to my understanding of communion. It wasn't true to my understanding of worship. And yet I did it because I caved to the parents who said, "This is bugging me." And so I think what has been an important challenge for me is to, one, balance what I know to be true, right? What I know the Spirit is doing in my midst, but also knowing that people are in different places, right? My youth were in one place that Sunday, and the rest of the congregation was in another place. And how do you find balance in that? So there's one piece of it, is trying to find the balance. The second piece of that was using that as a moment to teach my youth about finding the balance. And I don't think I did a good job. So that's sort of an example of where I'm trying to learn in my ministry. Yeah.
I'm Esther Rings, a member of this church, and I'm just wondering how you see the role of the church in dealing with the many environmental causes that are before us at this time. How you understand?
Yep. We have a huge, important role in this because I think that theology, our understanding of God, our understanding of the world has contributed to the ecological mess we're in right now. The idea that that it doesn't matter our presence on earth because our ultimate goal is to be with God is problematic, and it stops us from thinking about our role living here right now. So I think that's a shift in our understanding of our world. So there's that a piece of it. And I think that it's important for us to help change that conversation. The other thing is that we are actually we're buildings and people and have an impact on the world. So as an organization, as an institution that functions, we need to be committed to saving our planet by recycling, by using mugs instead of paper cups, etc. So they're by changing our lights, by changing the way we use our heat and our air. There's concrete ways that we can make a change. And I think that we can be grounded in our understanding of God and our relationship to the planet that can make that impact even more important, right? Doing this is doing work for God.
Well, I must agree. This has been a wonderful opportunity for us all. What a wonderful range of
Congratulations.
Oh, please. I didn't prepare anything. Thank you all. This has been a blast. Maybe it's the nerd in me, but this has been really, really fun. And I just hope that this is a conversation that we can all continue, actually. As I think that even through the course of this conversation, I learned a lot and reflected on a lot of things that in new and different ways. So, yes, yeah. Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, this meeting is adjourned. There are cookies and coffee out in the